Negative on extraction.
Negative on extraction.
Control. This is Sierra 1. We are Winchester on primary ammo. Secondary is low. We cannot hold the intersection. The radio crackled, static washing over the terrifying silence of the dusty bell tower. Sierra 1. This is command. Negative on extraction. The convoy is still 3 clicks out. You need to buy us 20 minutes. Do you copy? Sergeant Alina Petrova didn't look at the radio. Her eye was welded to the scope of the Tika T3X TAC A1. Her breath shallow and rhythmic, misting slightly in the freezing air. Through the glass, she saw them, a wave of gray uniforms moving through the smoke, using the burning wreckage of a school bus as cover. They were confident. They thought the sniper was dead. Alina! Victor's voice was wet, strained. He was slumped against the crumbling brickwork, one hand pressing a field dressing to his gut. The blood was dark, pooling on the dusty floorboards. You have to go. Leave the rifle. Put on the coat. You look like a child. They'll let you pass. Alina adjusted her windage turret 2 clicks left. Her face was smooth, devoid of grime, her eyes wide and pale. The face of a choir girl, not a killer. I can't do that, Vic, she whispered, her finger taking up the slack on the trigger. You have a life waiting. Nobody knows we're still here. Just walk away. If I walk away, those families on the bridge die. If you stay, you die. Alina exhaled a long, steady stream of air. Then I guess I'm not going home. Boom. The recoil slammed into her shoulder. 48 hours earlier, the outskirts of Krivoy. Location: Krivoy Sector 4, Eastern Approach Time, Roar 500 Zulu, local dawn. ROE: do not engage unless fired upon. Maintain low profile. The checkpoint smelled of wet wool, unwashed bodies, and the distinct, acrid bite of cheap tobacco. Sergeant Alina Petrova pulled the oversized gray coat tighter around her frame. It was 2 sizes too big, the sleeves swallowing her. Hands, a deliberate choice. Underneath the coat, strapped tight against her torso, was a layer of Kevlar mesh and a Glock 19. But to the bored conscript manning the barrier, she was just another piece of flotsam in the river of refugees, trying to enter the relative safety of the Krivoy Green Zone. Papers, the soldier grunted, not looking up. He was young, maybe 19, shivering in the dawn chill. Alina handed over the forged ID. The name read, Yana Belova, student. What's in the case? The soldier pointed his rifle barrel at the battered, sticker-covered violin case slung over her shoulder. My father's violin, Alina said. Her voice was soft, pitched slightly higher than her natural register. She shrank back, making herself look smaller, harmless. It's all I have left. The soldier looked at her face. The large, pale blue eyes, the messy braid of blonde hair, the tremble in her lip. It was a masterpiece of camouflage, far more effective than any ghillie suit. He saw a scared girl. He didn't see the calluses on her trigger finger or the calculation in her gaze, assessing the kill zone geometry of the checkpoint. Go! He waved her through, his eyes softening with pity. Get to the shelter, kid. Thank you, she whispered. She walked past the barrier, her boots crunching on the frost-covered asphalt. She didn't look back. She didn't run. She walked with the weary, trudging pace of the defeated. 50 meters past the checkpoint, she turned into a narrow alleyway filled with debris. A shadow detached itself from a doorway. You're late, Sparrow, a low voice rumbled. Lieutenant Victor Volkov stepped into the dim light. He looked like the city itself, rough, gray, and worn down. Checkpoint was thorough, Alina replied, her voice dropping the fearful tremolo, returning to the flat professional tone of a Tier 1 operator. They're checking bags. We need a new route for the heavy gear. We're clear, Volkov said, checking his watch. The apartment complex is 3 blocks east. Top floor. It overlooks the convoy route and the bridge. Perfect enfilade. They moved through the ruins of the city. Krivoy was a skeleton. The buildings were hollowed out by months of shelling, their windows like empty eye sockets staring accusation at the sky. The silence was heavy, broken only by the distant thud of artillery, the heartbeat of the war. They reached the target building, a 6-story residential block that had taken a tank round to the lobby but remained structurally sound. The stairwell was a nightmare of shattered concrete and twisted rebar. They climbed in silence, 5 flights up, legs burning, breath controlled. Apartment 6B still had a roof. The furniture was overturned, and a layer of dust covered everything like snow. Volkov moved to the rear of the room, setting up the comms relay. Alina went to the window. She stayed back in the shadows, 5 feet from the opening, ensuring no muzzle flash or lens glint would be visible from the street. She placed the violin case on a dust-covered dining table and unlatched it. Inside, there was no violin. Nestled in cut foam was the receiver of a Tikka T3X TAC A1. The barrel separated, the bolt removed. Beside it lay a Leupold Mark V HD scope and 4 box magazines loaded with .308 Winchester match-grade ammunition. Her hands moved with practiced, fluid grace. It was a ritual. Click, snap, slide. Within 40 seconds, the musical instrument was a lethal precision tool. She checked the action. Smooth. "Comms are up," Volkov said, putting on his headset. "Command says the convoy launches in 4 hours. We are eyes on only. ROE is strict, Alina. Unless we take direct fire, we do not, I repeat, do not, reveal this position. We are ghosts." Alina moved to the firing position she had selected, a pile of rubble set back from a hole in the wall. She prone out, settling the bipod into the dust. She uncapped the scope and looked through. The world narrowed to a circle of high-definition glass. She saw the bridge. She saw the refugee camp. She saw the soldiers at the checkpoint she had just passed. The boy who had let her through was lighting a cigarette, laughing with a comrade. Through the crosshairs, he looked even younger. "Copy, Sierra 1, Alina said, her cheek resting against the cold polymer of the stock. "We are ghosts." But the hair on the back of her neck stood up. The streets below were too quiet. The birds weren't singing. The city was holding its breath. "Vic," she said, not taking her eye off the scope. "Check the thermal on Sector 3, the heat signatures in that warehouse. They're moving into formation." Volkov raised his spotting scope. "I see them. No uniforms. Heavy weapons." "That's not a reception committee," Alina murmured, her finger hovering near the trigger guard. "That's an ambush." Location: Krivoy Sector 4, Overwatch position, Nest. Time 0830, Zulu, ROE, Green Zone protocols. In effect. Return fire only. The waiting was the hardest part of the job. It wasn't the cold that seeped through the floorboards, nor the cramping in her muscles from holding a prone position for hours. It was the silence of the mind that had to be maintained while the world below moved in ignorance. Alina lay motionless, her breathing shallow and controlled. Through the Leupold Mark V HD scope, the magnification dialed back to 12x. The intersection leading to the Freedom Bridge looked like a stage set for a tragedy. "Status?" Volkov asked. He was sitting with his back to the wall, knees drawn up, monitoring the scrambled radio frequencies and the rear entrance. "Movement in the ruins, Sector 3, Alina murmured. Her voice was flat, detached. 3 packs, no uniforms, carrying heavy duffels. They're moving toward the drainage culverts under the main road." She tracked the lead man. He was moving with purpose, low and fast. He didn't move like a civilian scavenging for food. He moved like a soldier clearing a fatal funnel. Alina adjusted the parallax knob. The image sharpened. The man stopped by a pile of rubble near the bridge abutment. He opened the duffel. Even at 400 meters, the shape was unmistakable. "Artillery shells," Alina said, her pulse skipping a single beat. "They're daisy-chaining 150mm shells. It's an IED. Are you sure?" Volkov shifted, crawling forward to bring his spotting scope to bear. "I see the wires. I see the receiver." Alina's finger rested on the trigger guard. She didn't touch the trigger yet. That was a threshold she couldn't cross without a word. "Vic, if they blow that stack when the trucks pass, there won't be anything left to bury." Volkov cursed softly in Russian. He keyed the radio. "Command, this is Sierra 1. We have visual on hostiles planting IEDs at Grid 44 Charlie. Requesting permission to engage. Over. The static hissed for 3 long seconds. To Alina, it felt like an hour. Sierra 1, this is... Command, the voice in the earpiece was crisp, distant, sitting in a climate-controlled room hundreds of miles away. Negative. We are under a strict ceasefire. The humanitarian corridor is a diplomatic priority. Do not, I repeat, do not engage unless fired upon. You will compromise the treaty. Over. Alina's jaw tightened. She watched the man below connect the wires. He was laughing, saying something to his companion. He looked relaxed. He knew the rules better than the UN did. He knew the snipers were leashed. Command, you don't understand, Volkov pressed, his voice straining with urgency. They are rigging the choke point. This isn't a violation, it's an execution. Copy, Sierra 1. Maintain observation. Log the activity. Do not escalate. Out. The link cut. Alina stared through the glass. The crosshairs hovered over the man's chest. The wind was negligible. The Coriolis effect at this range was minimal. It was an easy shot. A mechanical formality. 1 pound of pressure, and the threat would end. I have the shot, Vic, she whispered. I can drop the trigger man before he arms it. Volkov looked at her. He saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her knuckle was white against the stock. He put a hand on her shoulder. It was heavy, grounding. No, Alina. They're going to kill them. If you fire now, we start the war again. Maybe they're just bluffing. Maybe they're just holding the road hostage. That's a lot of explosives for a bluff, she retorted, but she moved her finger away from the trigger. The discipline of the hierarchy clamped down on her throat like a vice. She was a weapon, not a decision-maker. That was the deal. Time crawled. At Euro 900 Zulu, the first white UN trucks appeared around the bend, flags fluttering in the gray wind. Following them was a river of people, women pushing prams, old men with sacks on their backs, children holding hands. The innocence. They walked with a desperate hope, eyes fixed on the bridge that promised safety. Alina felt a sick, cold dread pooling in her stomach. She watched the man she had spared. He was now sitting on a broken wall, 200 meters back from the IED, holding a cell phone. Convoy is approaching the kill box, Alina said. Her voice wavered, just once. Vic, we have to call it in. Tell the convoy to stop. I'm trying. Volkov was frantically adjusting the frequency. They're jamming local bands. I can't reach the convoy commander. The lead truck rumbled onto the asphalt patch covering the drainage culvert. The driver, a helmeted peacekeeper, looked exhausted. Alina looked at the man with the phone. He wasn't looking at the truck. He was looking at his screen. His thumb hovered. Alina, Volkov started, sensing the shift in the air. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't wait for the ROE. The equation had changed, but she was too late. The hesitation of command, the seconds lost to bureaucracy, had been the margin of error. Through the scope, she saw the man's thumb pressed down. For a microsecond, nothing happened. Then, the road beneath the lead truck disintegrated. A plume of black earth and fire erupted upward, lifting the 6-ton vehicle into the air like a toy. The shockwave rippled out, visible in the dust, slamming into the walking civilians. Boom! The sound hit the nest a second later, rattling the window frames and shaking dust from the ceiling. Contact! Volkov yelled. Below, the innocent scene dissolved into hell. The man with the phone stood up and waved his arm. From the ruins on both sides of the street, muzzle flashes sparked like fireflies. The ambush wasn't just an IED, it was a coordinated slaughter. Free fire! Alina screamed, the restraint snapping. Engaging! She didn't look for the man with the phone anymore. She looked for the machine gunner setting up on a balcony overlooking the panicked crowd. She exhaled, finding the rhythm amidst the chaos. The innocence was gone. The war was back. Shamanai Yiskandidag location. Krivoy Sector 4, Overwatch position, nest time, Euro 902, Zulu, ROE, hostile intent confirmed, weapons free. The world had no sound, only pressure. Alina didn't hear the screams of the dying on the street below. The acoustic dampening of the room and her focus blocked them out. All that existed was the reticle of the Mark V HD and the rhythmic, terrifying mechanics of the Tika T3X. Breath out, pause, squeeze. The rifle bucked into her shoulder. The suppressor turned the explosion of the .308 round into a harsh metallic hiss, but the supersonic crack as the bullet broke the sound barrier was unmistakable downrange. Through the scope, she saw the result instantly. The machine gunner on the third-floor balcony of the opposing building jerked violently, his head snapping back. He collapsed over his PKM machine gun, the weapon tilting uselessly toward the sky. "Target down," Alina stated, her voice devoid of inflection. Her hand flew to the bolt handle, cycling it back and forward with a dry, oily clack-clack. The brass casing spun through the air, landing on the dusty floorboards with a chime that sounded obscenely cheerful. "Shift right," Volkov barked, his voice tight. He was on his knees now, scanning the ruins through the spotting scope, exposing himself slightly above the windowsill to get a better angle. "RPG, by the burned sedan. He's aiming for the second truck." Alina didn't question. She shifted her hips, dragging the bipod across the concrete dust. She found the sedan. A man in a mismatched tracksuit was kneeling, the devastating tube of an RPG-7 resting on his shoulder. He was lining up the shot on the bus where women were clawing at the windows. Distance, 420 meters. Target moving slightly. Wind from the east, full value. Alina held half a mil to the left. Crack. The RPG gunner crumpled. The rocket, unfired, clattered to the pavement. "Good kill," Volkov said, but there was panic in his peripheral. "Vision. They're swarming, Alina. It's a full company. They're using the civilians as cover to advance." Below, the scene was a nightmare of tactical geometry. The black wolves were pushing out of the alleyways, firing from behind fleeing refugees. They knew how to fight dirty. They knew NATO forces hesitated when the backdrop was soft. Alina felt a surge of bile, but she swallowed it down. She forced her brain to process the shapes not as people, but as targets. Weapon, no weapon. Threat, non-threat. She dropped a radio operator trying to coordinate the mortar team. She put a round through the engine block of a technical truck, trying to mount a DSHK heavy machine gun. Clack, clack. Fire. Clack, clack. Fire. "They see us!" Volkov shouted. The warning came a split second too late. The enemy hadn't seen the muzzle flash. Alina was too deep in the room for that, but they had triangulated the angle of the shots. A heavy machine gun from the ground floor of a bank building across. The square opened up on their tower. Concrete exploded around the window frame. Dust and jagged chips of brick sprayed the room like shrapnel. "Get down!" Alina screamed, rolling away from her rifle. "I can't see the source!" Volkov yelled, trying to peer through the dust cloud to mark the target for her. He leaned forward just an inch too far, trying to cut through the visual noise. A single round, a lucky stray or a marksman's answer, punched through the thin brickwork near the window jamb. It hit Volkov. The sound was wet and heavy, like a fist striking raw meat. The lieutenant was thrown backward, slamming against the far wall. He slid down, clutching his abdomen. "Vic!" Alina scrambled toward him on her hands and knees, keeping below the window line. "Stay! Stay on the gun!" Volkov gasped, his face draining of color instantly. Blood was already soaking through his fingers, dark and arterial. "Don't worry about me. Clear the sector." Alina froze. The instinct to help, him to rip open the medkit and apply pressure, was overwhelming. It was the human instinct, but the soldier in her knew the math. If she didn't silence that heavy machine gun, the rounds would keep coming. They would punch through the walls. They would kill them both. She looked at Volkov's eyes. They were wide, pleading. "Do your job." She turned back to the rifle. Tears blurred her vision, hot and stinging. She blinked them away furiously. She couldn't shoot if she couldn't see. She crawled back to the Tika, pulling the stock into her shoulder so hard it bruised. She took a deep breath, inhaling the dust and the copper scent of blood filling the room. She scanned the bank building. There, the muzzle flash in the shadows of the lobby. "You bastard," she whispered. She didn't account for the wind this time. She didn't calculate. She felt it. She sent the round with a prayer of pure rage. The machine gun stopped firing. Silence returned to the room, heavy and suffocating. Outside, The shooting continued, but the immediate threat to the tower was gone. The convoy below was moving again, the surviving trucks limping across the bridge, leaving the dead behind. Alina rolled onto her back, staring at the ceiling for a heartbeat, her chest heaving. Then she scrambled over to Volkov. He was still conscious, but his breathing was ragged. The pool of blood on the floor was widening, black in the dim light. Did they make it? He whispered. The trucks are crossing, Alina said, her hands shaking as she ripped the Velcro on her blowout kit. You're going to be fine, Vic. I'm going to patch you up. We're leaving. Volkov smiled, a grimace that showed blood on his teeth. We're not leaving, Sparrow. Look at the stairs. Alina looked. The door to the stairwell had been blown off its hinges by the shock wave of a tank round hitting the lower floors. The stairwell was gone. Rubble choked the exit. They were trapped, and Volkov was dying. Shakish. Tracker location, Krivoy Sector 4, Apartment 6B time, 0955 Zulu ROE, Survival Protocol. Extreme measures authorized. The smell of blood in a confined space was distinct, metallic, copper-heavy, and warm. It cut through the dry dust of the ruins, settling in the back of Alina's throat. Pressure, Alina hissed, her small hands working with frantic strength. I need you to keep pressure here, Vic. Lieutenant Volkov was pale, his skin turning the color of old parchment. The bullet had found the gap between the side plates of his body armor, entering just above the hip bone and tearing through the lower abdomen. It was a sucking wound, bubbling with every ragged breath he took. Alina ripped open the vacuum-sealed package of Kellogg's gauze. She didn't look at his face. She couldn't afford the empathy right now. She focused on the anatomy. She shoved the gauze deep into the wound cavity, packing it tight against the artery. Volkov groaned, a guttural sound of pure agony that made Alina's hands tremble for a fraction of a second. Sorry, she whispered, her voice cracking. I'm sorry, Vic. Hold on. She grabbed the cat tourniquet from his rig. She slid it high up his thigh, cinching it down until the windlass wouldn't turn another inch. The bleeding slowed but didn't stop completely. It was a core wound. Tourniquets were limited here. She taped the dressing down, her hands slick with red. Radio! Volkov gasped, his eyes unfocused, staring at the cracked ceiling. Call the bird. Alina wiped her hands on her trousers, leaving dark streaks on the gray fabric. She crawled over to the communications pack. The unit had taken shrapnel. The antenna was bent at a sharp angle, the plastic casing cracked. She keyed the handset. Command, this is Sierra 1. We have a casualty. Category Alpha. Immediate extraction required. Do you copy? Static, just a white wall of noise. Command Sierra 1. Mayday. Mayday. She checked the frequency. She switched to the emergency guard channel. Nothing but the rhythmic thrum of electronic jamming. The enemy had deployed EW, electronic warfare assets. They were isolating the battlefield. It's dead, Alina said, the realization settling over her like a heavy blanket. She looked at the door. The stairwell was a chasm of twisted rebar and concrete slabs. They were 6 stories up with no way down and a dying man on the floor. Volkov seemed to understand the silence. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound. Leave me, he wheezed. The window. Rappel. You can make it. Alina crawled back to the window, staying low. She peered over the ledge. The street below was swarming. The convoy had escaped, disappearing into the distance. But the city behind it was filling up with the enemy. A BTR-80 armored personnel carrier was rolling down the main avenue, its heavy tires crushing the debris. Infantry squads were fanning out, checking buildings, moving with the confidence of predators who knew the shepherd was gone. If she tried to rappel down the side of the building now, she would be a silhouette against the brickwork, a target practice dummy. There is no way down, Alina said softly. She turned back to Volkov. And I'm not leaving you alone. You're stubborn. Volkov managed a weak smile, his eyes fluttering. You look like my daughter. She's innocent too. The word stung. Innocent. Alina looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the dead radio. Her face was smeared with dust and blood, not hers. Her blonde braid was fraying. She didn't look like a soldier. She looked like a victim. That was her armor. That was her camouflage. But inside, something was hardening. The fear was calcifying into a cold, sharp resolve. She was no longer the junior operator. She was the ranking officer in the room. She moved to Volkov's kit. She took his spare magazines. She took his thermal monocular. She took the laser rangefinder. She stripped him of everything she could use to kill. "What are you doing?" Volkov whispered. "We can't go down," Alina said, moving back to the rifle. She checked the chamber. She adjusted the scope's magnification back up to 15x. "And they're coming to sweep the buildings. If they find us, they'll kill us." Slowly, she set the rifle back on the bipod. She positioned herself comfortably, settling her breathing. The panic was gone, replaced by a strange, hyper-aware clarity. "I'm going to make them afraid to cross that street," she said. She looked through the scope. The BTR-80 had stopped. The commander was popping his head out of the hatch to survey the area. He was confident. He thought the threat was neutralized. Alina centered the crosshair on his helmet. "Sleep now, Vic," she commanded, her voice steady, devoid of the tremble that had been there 10 minutes ago. "I have the watch." She wasn't waiting for orders anymore. She was the order. Below, the enemy commander laughed at something his driver said. It was the last sound he would ever hear. Location: Krivoy Sector 4, Apartment 6B, time 1845, Zulu dusk. ROE: evade and eliminate. Twilight in Krivoy was not a gentle fading of the light. It was a drowning. The gray ruins turned to charcoal, and the shadows stretched out like grasping fingers, merging the piles of debris with the dark recesses of the buildings. For a sniper, this was the witching hour. Too dark for day optics, too much ambient light for night vision to be fully effective yet. It was the hour of the thermal. Alina pressed the rubber eye cup of Volkov's thermal monocular to her left eye. The world transformed into a spectrum of white-hot and cool blue. The cooling brickwork was a dull gray, but down on the street, the heat signatures of the living burned like ghosts. The enemy advance had stalled. Her shot on the commander had done its job. It had injected fear into the equation. Now they weren't marching. They were hunting. 3, 4. Moving up the left flank, she whispered to the empty room. Volkov was unconscious, his breathing shallow and erratic. He was no longer a spotter. He was a silent metronome counting down the time she had left. She switched back to the rifle scope. She couldn't risk the thermal on the rifle yet. The batteries were low. She had to rely on contrast. A squad of scouts was moving through the burnt-out shell of a pharmacy across the street, just 80 meters away. They were good. They moved heel to toe, avoiding the crunch of glass. But they made a mistake. They assumed the threat was on the rooftops. Alina was deep inside the room, shooting through a loophole, a fist-sized gap in a bookshelf she had dragged in front of the window. She tracked the point man. He stopped, scanning the upper floors of her building. Crack. The sound of the subsonic round was little more than a handclap. The point man dropped without a sound, his throat destroyed. The rest of the squad dove for cover, firing blindly at the roof. They were shooting 20 feet above her head. "Wrong floor," Alina murmured. She cycled the bolt. She waited. Patience was a weapon. She let them panic. She let them shout orders into their radios. When a second soldier peeked out to grab his fallen comrade, she put a round through his shoulder. Not a kill shot, a wounding shot. He screamed. The sound echoed off the concrete canyon. Bait, she thought, a cold shiver running down her spine. I am using a human being as bait. It worked. 2 more rushed to help. She dropped them both in rapid succession, then silence. The enemy pulled back. They realized this wasn't random fire. This was surgical. Alina exhaled, resting her forehead against the stock. Her hands were trembling now, not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash. She needed water. She reached for her canteen, taking a small sip, swishing it around her dry mouth before swallowing. A noise. Not outside. Inside. The sound of a boot scuffing on concrete. Down the hall. Alina froze. The stairwell was blocked, but the fire escape on the eastern wall. Had she checked the lattice? She rolled away from the rifle. drawing the Glock 19 from her chest rig. She moved silently across the room, avoiding the debris on the floor. She pressed herself against the door frame leading to the hallway. A shadow moved. A soldier had climbed the drain pipe and entered through the kitchen window. He was creeping down the hall, AK-74 raised. He was young, barely 20. His face was smeared with camo paint, but his eyes were wide with terror. He turned the corner and saw her. For a second, the universe held its breath. He didn't fire. He saw a petite girl in an oversized gray coat, blonde hair messy, eyes wide and watery. He saw a civilian trapped in a war zone. His weapon lowered slightly. His mouth opened, perhaps to tell her to hide, or to ask if she was alone. "Don't," he started. Alina didn't hesitate. She didn't let him finish the sentence. She didn't let him be human. She raised the Glock and fired 2 rounds into his chest, then 1 into his head. The Mozambique drill, executed with muscle memory speed. The shots were deafening in the hallway. The soldier collapsed backward, his eyes still open, the question dying on his lips. Alina stood over him, the pistol smoking in her hand. She looked at his face. He looked like the boy at the checkpoint. He looked like he could have been her brother. He had hesitated because he saw a girl. She had survived because she was a soldier. She felt a tear track through the dust on her cheek. It felt hot, like acid. She wiped it away furiously. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the corpse. Then she bent down and took his grenades. She returned to the main room. Volkov stirred. "Alina?" "I'm here, Vic." "Was that inside?" "A stray dog," she lied. "I chased it off." She went back to the rifle. Outside, the engine of the BTR-80 roared to life again. They weren't sending scouts anymore. From the enemy lines, a flare shot up, bathing the street in an eerie, oscillating red light. Then came the distinct thump, thump, thump of mortar tubes. They were done playing hide and seek. They were going to bring the building down. Location: Krivoy, Sector 4, Apartment 6B. Time: 1910. Zulu ROE, dual protocol. 1 shot, 1 kill. The building groaned. It was a deep tectonic sound, vibrating through the skeletal steel of the structure as the mortar rounds walked closer. Thump. Whistle. Crack. Dust rained down from the ceiling in thick, choking sheets. Alina pulled the keffiyeh scarf up over her nose and mouth, squinting through the grit. She didn't flinch at the explosions anymore. She was listening to the rhythm. The rounds were landing in the courtyard and the street, kicking up debris clouds that blinded the lower floors, but they weren't hitting the upper levels. "They're not trying to kill us with artillery," Alina whispered, her voice barely audible over the ringing in her ears. "They're bracketing. They want me heads down." Volkov, now drifting in and out of consciousness, mumbled something unintelligible. His hand twitched against the floorboards. Alina crawled away from the loophole she had been using. She knew the tactic. The wolf was out there. The mortars were the beaters. The sniper was the hunter waiting for the bird to flush. If she stayed at the same window, she was dead. If she moved, he would see the motion. She dragged herself on her elbows across the room to the secondary firing position, a hole in the drywall that looked out through the shattered balcony door of the kitchen. It offered a narrower field of view, slicing through the chaotic skyline of Sector 4. She raised the spotting scope slowly, keeping it deep in the shadows of the room. She didn't look for a man. A good sniper never looked like a man. She looked for the unnatural, a horizontal line in a vertical world, a shadow that didn't shift with the flickering fires, the geometry of a barrel. Scanning. Sector 1, clear. Sector 2, burning technical. Sector 3, the old clock tower, 500 meters out. It was perfect. Too perfect. High ground, deep recesses, overlooking her entire southern exposure. "I see you," she breathed. There was no movement, but there was a void in the rubble on the 4th floor of the tower, a dark space that absorbed the light, and then a tiny rhythmic distortion. Heat waves, a barrel warming up, or just the exhaust of the city. She couldn't risk a shot on a hunch. If she missed, he would trace the vector and put a 7.62mm round through her eye socket before she could cycle the bolt. She needed him to commit. She crawled back to Volkov's kit. Her hands felt numb, detached from her body. She found the signal mirror, a small square of polished polycarbonate used for signaling aircraft. "Sorry, Vic," she murmured. "I need to borrow this." She grabbed a piece of broken molding from the floor and used a strip of duct tape to secure the mirror to the end. It was crude, childish almost, a puppet show for a murderer. She moved back to her primary window, the one she had been shooting from all day, the one he was watching. She positioned herself 6 feet back, behind the heavy oak dining table she had overturned for cover. She set the rifle on the table, aiming through the kitchen loophole toward the clock tower. "Come on," she hissed. "Look at the shiny thing." With her left hand, she extended the stick toward the primary window, angling the mirror to catch the flickering light of the burning BTR-80 on the street below. She twitched it. Once. Twice. A flash of light cut through the gloom. To a watcher 500 meters away, it looked exactly like the sun reflecting off an objective lens. A sniper adjusting their scope. A mistake. Crack thwack. The sound of the bullet impacting the wall was instantaneous. The round punched through the brickwork inches from the mirror, sending a spray of red brick dust into the room. It was a perfect shot. If her head had been there, it would have been vaporized. But the shot did something else. It created a muzzle flash in the dark void of the clock tower. Alina saw it, a tiny star bursting in the gray. She didn't think. The equation was already solved. Distance, 500. Wind, negligible. Target, the flash. She exhaled, her heart stopping between beats, her finger pressed straight back. Boom! The Tika roared. The recoil slammed into her bruised shoulder, a familiar, punishing lever. She didn't wait to see the impact. She ducked immediately, racking the bolt. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. Silence from the clock tower. She risked a glance through the spotting scope. In the 4th-floor window of the tower, the darkness had changed shape. A figure had slumped forward over the ledge, a long rifle dangling precariously before slipping and falling 5 stories to the street below. "Scratch one," Alina said, her voice trembling slightly. The duel was won, but the victory was hollow. The muzzle flash of her Tika had lit up the 6th floor of the apartment block like a lighthouse. The deception was over. The mortar crews stopped firing. The infantry on the street stopped shouting. A low mechanical rumble started from the east, the sound of heavy treads crushing concrete. "Alina," Volkov whispered, his voice gaining a sudden, terrifying clarity. That wasn't a scout. I got him, Vic. The sniper is down." "No," Volkov wheezed, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. "Listen, that sound." Alina listened. It wasn't just an APC. It was deeper, a turbine engine. T-72, she realized, the blood draining from her face. Main battle tank. The BTRs were just the escort. The enemy was bringing a tank to kill a single girl. She looked at her ammo count. 11 rounds of .308, 3 magazines for the Glock, and a dying man. "Get to the back room," Alina said, grabbing Volkov's drag handle. "They're going to put a shell through this window in about 30 seconds. She pulled him, her boots slipping on the casing-strewn floor, as the massive turret of the tank slowly rotated toward their building, its black eyes searching for the Sparrow. Chuga location, Krivoy Sector 4, Apartment 6B, ruined, time 1918, Zulu ROE, total war. The T-72 tank fired. The world dissolved into a blinding white flash, and a concussion that felt like being hit by a freight train. The high-explosive fragmentation round didn't enter the room. It detonated against the exterior wall just below the windowsill. The floor heaved. The entire front facade of the apartment blasted inward in a storm of pulverized brick and jagged rebar. Alina was lifted off the ground and thrown backward, landing hard on top of the debris near the rear hallway where she had dragged Volkov. For 10 seconds there was no sound, just a high-pitched scream in her head, the death knell of her eardrums. She gasped, sucking in air that was more dust than oxygen. She coughed, hacking up gray phlegm. Her vision swam, blurred by tears and grit. "Vic," she croaked. He was there, covered in a layer of gray dust like a statue. but his chest was still moving. The blast had missed him by feet. Alina tried to stand, but her legs wobbled. She forced herself up, using the wall for support. Through the gaping hole where the window used to be, she saw them. The dust cloud from the explosion was their smokescreen. Under the cover of the tank's suppression, the enemy infantry was surging forward. Dozens of them. They were sprinting out of the alleyways, moving toward the bridge like a gray tide. They thought the sniper was dead. They thought the way was open. Not yet, Alina whispered. She stumbled back to the table. It was overturned, splintered. The Tika lay on the floor, half buried in rubble. She grabbed it. The scope. Mount was battered, but the optic looked intact. She worked the bolt. It was stiff with grit, but it opened. She wiped the bolt face with her thumb, blew into the chamber, and slammed it forward. She didn't have a stable platform anymore. She rested the rifle barrel on a chunk of concrete that had once been the balcony railing. She looked through the scope. The glass was cracked in the lower quadrant, a spiderweb fracture, but the crosshair was clear. Target, infantryman, running. Range, 300 meters. She didn't feel the recoil this time. Her shoulder was a numb slab of meat. Crack. The lead runner dropped. Alina racked the bolt. Up, back, forward, down. The muscle memory took over. She wasn't Alina Petrova anymore. She wasn't a girl with a violin case. She was a machine that converted 308 rounds into casualties. Crack. A second man fell. The enemy wavered. They couldn't hear the shot over the roar of the tank engine and the ringing in their own ears, but they saw their comrades drop. They looked up at the ruined building. How could anything be alive in there? Alina didn't give them time to think. She targeted the NCO, waving them forward. Crack. Center mass. She targeted the radio operator. Crack. She entered the zone. It was a cold, dark place where time didn't exist. There was no fear, no pity, no disgust. There was only the math. Lead the target. Exhale. Squeeze. Cycle. The magazine ran dry. She ejected it, the empty box clattering onto the stones. She grabbed another from her pouch, her last full magazine. 10 rounds. 7, she counted aloud, her voice sounding strange and distant. 8, 9. She was reloading and firing with a speed that defied the manual of arms for a bolt-action rifle. To the soldiers on the street, it sounded like semi-automatic fire. They dove for cover behind burning cars and Jersey barriers. The charge faltered. The tank commander, buttoned up inside his steel beast, couldn't see what was happening. He swiveled the turret, searching for a target, but Alina was too small, too deep in the wreckage. She saw a soldier pop up to fire an RPG at the bridge supports. Crack! He spun around, the rocket firing into the ground, detonating harmlessly. That was number 48, or maybe 49. She had lost count of the total since morning. The number didn't matter. Only the pile of brass casings by her knee mattered. Each one was a life. Each one was a second of time bought for the trucks disappearing over the horizon. Her barrel was radiating heat. The mirage from the hot steel was distorting her view, making the target shimmer like water. "Move!" she commanded them. "Stand up so I can kill you." But they didn't move. They broke. The infantry, terrified of the invisible demon in the ruins that survived tank shells and never missed, began to pull back. They dragged their wounded, retreating to the safety of the buildings on the far side of the square. Alina fired at a retreating leg. Crack. The bolt clicked. On an empty chamber, she reached for a magazine. Her pouch was empty. She patted her chest rig. Empty. She checked her pockets. She found 3 loose rounds, dirty, lint-covered cartridges she had scavenged earlier. She single-loaded one into the chamber. The street was clearing. The infantry was gone. But the T-72 remained. Its engine idled, a deep, guttural growl. The turret turned slowly, mechanically, back toward her building. It knew. The infantry had retreated, which meant the tank was free to finish the job without risking friendly fire. Alina slumped against the wall, the rifle slipping from her grasp. Her hands were black with carbon and blood. She looked at them as if they belonged to a stranger. "I held them, Vic," she whispered to the dust. "They didn't cross." Volkov didn't answer. The tank lowered its main gun barrel slightly. It was aiming for the structural pillars of the floor below them. It wasn't going to just blow up the room. It was going to bring the whole building down on top of their heads. Alina looked at the 3 loose rounds in her hand. They were useless against reactive armor. She was the deadliest sniper in the sector, and she was powerless against 70 tons of steel. Unless she remembered the thermal view. The tank commander had opened his hatch earlier to get fresh air. The optics on those old T-72s were garbage in the dust. If he wanted to verify the kill, if he wanted to see the body, he would have to look. She picked up the rifle. She loaded the last 3 rounds. "Come on," she hissed, staring at the steel hatch of the turret. "Be arrogant. Be stupid." She waited for the monster to blink. Yeshi's location: Krivoy, Sector 4, ruins of Apartment 6B, time 1935. Zulu ROE compromised. The T-72 did not fire. The engine revved, a plume of black diesel smoke coughing into the twilight air, but the main gun held its position. The hatch remained sealed. Alina lowered the rifle, her brow furrowed in confusion. Why wait? They had the building bracketed. One key round into the support pillars, and gravity would finish the job. Then she heard the shouting. "Move! Move, dogs!" The infantry was returning, but they weren't running in a tactical spread this time. They were walking slowly, shoulder to shoulder, a dark phalanx moving up the center of the street. Alina raised the scope, squinting through the spiderweb crack in the lens. Her breath hitched in her throat. They weren't alone. In front of the soldiers, forming a living wall, were 6 civilians, a woman in a torn nightgown, an old man with blood on his face, the young soldier from the checkpoint who had let her pass, stripped of his jacket, hands zip-tied, being pushed forward by the muzzle of an AK-74. "No," Alina whispered. The word felt like a shard of glass in her mouth. The enemy commander walked behind the young soldier. He was smart. He used the boy's body to cover his own, peering over the hostages, shoulder, scanning the ruins. He knew the sniper was watching. He was betting everything on the assumption that the shooter was a NATO professional, bound by the laws of armed conflict. "Come out!" the commander bellowed, his voice echoing off the concrete. "Surrender or we execute them. We know you are out of ammo." Alina looked at the 3 rounds sitting on the dusty table. 1, 2, 3. She slid one into the chamber. 2 left on the table. If she didn't fire, they would cross the bridge. They would catch the convoy. They would kill everyone. If she did fire, she would have to shoot through the meat of the innocent to hit the guilty. She adjusted her position. The bipod was gone, buried in rubble. She rested the barrel on her own forearm, ignoring the heat. Distance, 200 meters. Target, the commander. Obstacle, the boy who had saved her life. "I can't do it," she thought. The girl with the violin case couldn't do it. The girl who wanted to go home couldn't do it. But the sparrow had to. She focused on the geometry. The commander was shorter than the boy. He was tucked tight behind the boy's back. But the commander's head was exposed. No, too risky. If he ducked, she missed. She looked lower. The boy's shoulder, the deltoid muscle. If she put a round through the outer edge of the boy's shoulder, the bullet, a 175-grain Match King, would punch through, expand slightly, and enter the commander's chest cavity. It was madness. It was cruel. It was necessary. "Forgive me," she whispered. She centered the crosshair on the boy's left shoulder. She could see the terror in his eyes. He was looking right at her building, pleading silently. "Don't shoot." Alina's finger tightened. The trigger brake was crisp, 2.5 pounds of pressure. Crack. The boy screamed, a high, piercing sound that cut through the war noise. He spun violently as the bullet tore through his shoulder. Blood misted in the air, but the round didn't stop. It exited the boy's back and slammed into the commander's sternum. The officer looked down, shocked, as a red blossom appeared on his chest. He crumbled, his legs folding beneath him. The formation shattered. The soldiers, seeing their leader drop from a shot that seemed impossible, a shot that went through a hostage, panicked. They broke rank, shoving the hostages aside, scrambling for cover. The psychological wall was breached. They weren't fighting a soldier. They were fighting a monster who didn't care about collateral damage. "Run!" Alina screamed, though they couldn't hear her. "Run!" The hostages scattered, diving into the alleys. The young boy lay on the asphalt, clutching his shoulder, writhing. He was alive. He would have a scar, but he was alive. Alina cycled the bolt. 2 rounds left. She found a machine gunner trying to rally the squad. Crack. He dropped. 1 round left. The street was empty again. The infantry had fled back to the safety of the armor. Alina stared at the single cartridge, remaining on the table. It was tarnished, the copper jacket dull. The last round. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of waiting. It was the silence of a decision made. The T-72 engine roared. The turret didn't move. "They're not coming back," Volkov rasped from the shadows. He had dragged himself to a sitting position, his face gray, eyes sunken. "They're done losing men to one ghost." "Then why isn't the tank firing?" Alina asked, her voice hollow. "Because they're calling for the hammer." Volkov looked at the sky. From the distance, a low whistle began. It wasn't a mortar, it was louder, deeper, like the sky was being torn open. "Artillery," Volkov said, closing his eyes. 152 Miniature howitzers, grid removal. They weren't going to storm the building. They were going to erase the coordinate. Alina looked at her rifle. It was hot, empty, and useless against the sky. She looked at Volkov. "We did it," she said, crawling over to him. She sat beside him in the blood and dust. "The trucks are gone. The bridge is clear." "We held the line," Volkov whispered, taking her hand. His grip was weak. The first shell hit the building next to them. Location: Krivoy Sector 4. The grave, formerly Apartment 6B. Time 1940 Zulu. ROE null. The first shell didn't hit the room. It hit the support columns 3 floors down. For a fraction of a second, Alina felt a sickening sense of weightlessness. The concrete floor beneath her boots ceased to be a solid object and became a liquid wave. The physics of the building failed. The ceiling cracked open like an eggshell, revealing a sky choked with black smoke, before the entire structure folded in on itself. There was no sound. The overpressure of the explosion had already collapsed her ear canals. There was only violence. Alina was thrown against the wall. Then the wall disappeared. She fell. Darkness. Debris. The sensation of being put into a blender filled with rocks. Something heavy slammed into her ribs, forcing the air from her lungs. She flailed, her fingers scraping against jagged rebar, trying to find purchase. But there was nothing to hold. Then, the crushing stop. Silence returned, heavy and suffocating. Alina woke up coughing. Her mouth was full of grit, the alkaline taste of pulverized, centuries-old mortar. She couldn't see anything. The air was thick, hot, and solid with dust. "Vic?" she tried to say, but no sound came out. Her throat was raw. She tried to move her legs. Her left leg was pinned. Panic flared, hot and bright. She thrashed, clawing at the pile of masonry on top of her. "Calm down, assess." She forced herself to stop. She wiggled her toes. They moved. It wasn't a slab, just rubble. She used her elbows to leverage herself up, dragging her legs free. Her body screamed in protest. Her ribs felt like broken glass. Her head throbbed with a concussion that made the darkness spin. She reached for her chest rig, the flashlight, sheet, found the small tactical light and clicked it on. The beam cut through the dust like a lightsaber. She was in a pocket of space created by a fallen beam in a slab of floor. It was a tomb. "Victor," she rasped, the sound a pathetic croak. She swept the light around. To her left, the twisted remains of the radio pack. To her right, the glint of a rifle barrel protruding from the debris. And in the center, a hand. Alina scrambled forward, ignoring the pain in her side. She dug frantically, tossing bricks and chunks of plaster aside. She uncovered his arm, then his shoulder, then his face. Lieutenant Volkov was lying on his back. His eyes were open, coated in a fine layer of gray dust. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at nothing. A piece of rebar had pierced his chest, ending what the bullet had started. He was gone. Alina sat back on her heels. She stared at him. She expected to cry. She expected to scream. But there was nothing, just a hollow, echoing emptiness. The grief was too big to fit inside her right now. If she let it in, it would crush her faster than the building had. He's dead. You're not. The thought was cold, alien. It was the voice of the sparrow. She reached out and closed his eyes. Her fingers left streaks of clean skin on his dust-covered face. "Goodbye, Vic," she whispered. She turned away. She couldn't stay here. The air was running out, and the artillery was still falling, though distant now. They were walking the fire line backward, satisfied the grid was erased. She crawled to the rifle. She pulled it from the rubble. The Tika T3X was scarred, the finish scratched down to bare metal, but the action was closed. The bolt was forward. She checked the scope. The glass was shattered, useless. She tore the optic off the rail and threw it aside. Iron sights were gone too. She would have to point shoot. She checked the magazine. Empty. She checked the chamber. 1 round. The one she had loaded for the last stand that never happened. 1 round. She checked her hip. The Glock 19 was still in its holster, covered in dust. She pulled it out, racked the slide to clear the grit, and checked the mag. 7 rounds. She had 8 bullets to fight a battalion. Alina looked up. Above her, a sliver of night sky was visible through the twisted wreckage of the elevator shaft. It was a chimney leading to the surface. She slung the rifle across her back. She began to climb. It was a nightmare ascent. Every movement sent showers of pebbles down into the dark. Her fingernails tore. Her knees scraped raw. Twice she slipped, catching herself on jagged metal that sliced her palms. But she didn't stop. She climbed with the mindless determination of an insect. She pulled herself over the lip of the crater and rolled onto the broken asphalt of the street. The cool night air hit her face. It smelled of ozone and burning rubber. She lay there for a moment, staring at the stars. She was alive. She was the only thing left alive in Sector 4. Below, down the hill near the bridge, she saw headlights. Vehicles were moving. Not tanks, trucks. They were coming to collect the dead. They were coming to verify the kill. Alina sat up. She wiped the blood from her forehead. She looked at the bridge. It was still standing. The convoy was gone. She should run. She could fade into the ruins, find a hole, and wait for the main NATO force to push back in a week. But then she saw it. A single transport truck stopped at the far end of the bridge. It had a flat tire. The driver was out, frantically trying to change it. Behind him, approaching from the city, was a patrol of 3 enemy soldiers. They hadn't seen him yet, but they would in about 2 minutes. Alina looked at her rifle. 1 round, no scope. Distance, 150 meters. "Not yet," she whispered to the dead city. "I'm not done yet." Location, Krivoy Sector 4. The bridge approach time, 1955, Zulu ROE. Expend all assets. Pain was a distant signal. Now, like a radio transmission from another country. Alina didn't feel the broken ribs or the lacerations on her palms. She felt only the gravity of the rifle in her hands and the cold wind biting through her torn uniform. She moved like a wraith through the graveyard of vehicles leading to the bridge. She couldn't take the high ground. She was the ground now, crawling on her stomach over broken glass and spent casings. The patrol was closing in. 3 shadows. They weren't moving with the tactical caution of the earlier squads. They were chatting, weapons slung low. They saw a stranded truck, a helpless driver cursing at a lug nut. They saw easy prey. Alina slid behind the wheel of a burnout sedan. She rested the barrel of the Tika on the rim of the tire. Distance, 80 meters. Optic, none. Ammo, 1 round. She looked down the naked barrel. Without the scope, the target was just a dark smudge against the gray concrete. She couldn't aim for the head. She couldn't aim for the heart. She had to trust the alignment of the steel. "Hey!" one of the soldiers shouted, raising his rifle. The driver froze, dropping his tire iron, hands shooting up in surrender. The soldier laughed. He stepped forward, raising his weapon to execute the driver. Alina didn't breathe. She didn't think. She simply pointed the spear of her will at the soldier's chest. Boom! The muzzle flash was a blinding sphere in the darkness. The recoil kicked hard against her damaged shoulder, but she didn't flinch. Downrange, the lead soldier was lifted off his feet as if yanked by a cable. The .308 round, unguided by glass but guided by 48 hours of hell, struck center mass. He hit the ground and didn't move. The other 2 soldiers spun around, panicked, firing wildly at the sedan. Bullets sparked off the metal frame, showering Alina with sparks. She dropped the rifle. It was just a club now. She drew the Glock. 7 rounds. She stood up. She didn't seek cover. There was no cover left. She walked around the front of the sedan, the pistol extended in a two-handed grip. She was a ghost rising from the wreckage, a small, dust-covered girl with eyes that burned like magnesium. Pop, pop. She fired a controlled pair. The second soldier, trying to reload, took a round to the leg and one to the stomach. He fell screaming. The third soldier, the heavy gunner, swung his PKM machine gun toward her. Alina walked toward him. She didn't run. She just walked, firing as she moved. Pop, pop, pop. Dirt kicked up around her boots. A bullet tugged at her sleeve. She didn't care. She was already dead. Her body just hadn't caught up yet. Click. The slide of the Glock locked back. Empty. The machine gunner was still standing, though he was clutching his shoulder. He raised his weapon, a snarl of rage on his face. He had her. She was 10 meters away, weapon dry, defenseless. Alina let the pistol drop to her side. She stood in the middle of the road, staring down the barrel of the machine gun. She didn't close her eyes. She wanted to see it coming. "Do it," she whispered. Then the sky tore open. A sound like the tearing of the Earth's crust roared overhead. 2 A-10 Warthogs screamed over the bridge, banking hard. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon unleashed a short, terrible burst. Brrr! The machine gunner, the asphalt, and the darkness behind him vaporized in a cloud of dust and 30 millimeter depleted uranium. The shock wave knocked Alina to her knees. Silence returned, but this time it was the silence of absolute dominance. The sound of rotor blades followed. A Black Hawk helicopter coming in fast and low, searchlights cutting the gloom. Sierra 1! Sierra 1, identify! A voice crackled from a loudspeaker. Alina didn't answer. She sat on the cold road, her legs folded beneath her. She picked up a spent 9mm casing and rolled it between her bloody fingers. Friendly forces swarmed the bridge. Operators with quad nods and lasers surrounded her. Weapons raised, then lowered as they saw what she was. "Clear! Sector clear!" A medic rushed forward, kneeling beside her. "Ma'am, Sergeant, can you hear me?" Alina looked up. The medic was young. He looked worried. He was checking her pupils, checking for wounds. "Where is the driver?" she asked, her voice sounding like grinding stones. "He's safe, ma'am. We got him. You saved him." The medic began to cut away her sleeve to treat the shrapnel wounds. "You're going home, Sergeant. It's over." Alina looked past him, back toward the ruined city. She saw the collapsed apartment building. She saw the smoke rising from the clock tower. She saw the ghosts of 50 men and one spotter standing in the mist. She looked down at her hands. They were small. They were pale under the soot. They looked like the hands of a girl who played the violin. "Home," she repeated. The word had no meaning. The medic lifted her onto the stretcher. As they carried her toward the waiting helicopter, the wind blew the hair from her face. To the soldiers, watching, she looked like a miracle, a fragile, innocent thing that had survived the apocalypse. But as Alina stared up at the rotating blades, her eyes were dry and hollow. The innocent girl had died in the bell tower. The thing that was going home was something else entirely. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in 2 days, she slept.